Financial Avoidance. So, Mr. Warren Mosler, I'm honored to speak with you, and may I ask you to explain to me the LTRO operation.
Okay, well, the LTRO is for long-term repo operation. And what this is the central bank financing the member banks by accepting their securities as collateral for loans. So if you're a bank, a Greek bank or an Italian bank or a German bank, and you want to borrow money from the central bank, what you do is present your collateral, you present your bonds. In this case, your bonds might be bonds from Italy, Greece, Germany, France. They could be from anywhere. You present them to the central bank, and the central bank loans you money, loans you euro. And that's all it is. Now, this is supposed to be, let's put it this way, if the monetary system were understood, this would just be a routine operation that would not make headlines and no one would pay any attention to. It's the type of thing the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan do pretty much on a continuous basis. And it's of no concern to the markets, and it's of no concern to anyone else. The reason it's of concern in the euro area isn't because they're doing it, it's because they weren't doing it. They weren't performing a normal, typical liquidity provision type of function that central banks always provide. And by not providing liquidity, stress appears in the banking system of all kinds. Banks start having all kinds of problems. Okay, so this is just routine liquidity provision. There's nothing special about it, but there is something special about not doing it, which violates the very principle for which central banks exist, which is to maintain their clearing system.
So what is your proposal about the problem of the Eurozone, the deficit spending, and your proposal to make the distribution of cash based on the size of the population?
My proposal is simply for the European Central Bank to make cash distributions to all the member governments based on the size of their population. And my proposal is that the initial distribution would be 10% of GDP, and then it would be at least 5% of GDP every year after that as a simple cash distribution to the member nations. Now, this would not allow, the purpose would not be for the members to increase their spending, but it would allow them to reduce their debt by that amount. And that would take away the funding problem, the solvency problem. It would bring their interest rates all the way back down. It would not cause inflation. It has nothing to do with inflation. However, the primary problem in the Eurozone is that the authorities do not understand the need for government deficits. And what you have in the Eurozone is an institutional structure, mainly the pension fund structure and the corporate reserve structure, that requires large deficits. Otherwise, it just simply can't function at all. And it works a little bit like this. The government deficits equal the savings, the euro savings of the rest of the economy to the penny. And so if you've got a 15 trillion euro deficit across the Eurozone, that means the rest of the world somewhere, either in your own countries or maybe some foreign countries, but somebody has a savings of exactly 15 trillion euro. And that the form of that savings is your bonds and cash in circulation, but it's mostly your bonds. Okay? The bonds issued by a government when a deficit spend become the savings for pension funds, for example. Now, if you go to a country like Italy, I'm trying to remember the number, but it might be something like 20% of all wages go into an employee's pension fund.
So, what is your proposal about the problems of the Eurozone?
My proposal is simply for the European Central Bank to make cash distributions to all the member governments based on the size of their population. And my proposal is that the initial distribution would be 10% of GDP, and then it would be at least 5% of GDP every year after that, as a simple cash distribution to the member nations. Now, this would not allow, the purpose would not be for the members to increase their spending, but it would allow them to reduce their debt by that amount. And that would take away the funding problem, the solvency problem. It would bring their interest rates all the way back down. It would not cause inflation. It has nothing to do with inflation. However, the primary problem in the Eurozone is that the authorities do not understand the need for government deficits. And what you have in the Eurozone is an institutional structure, mainly the pension fund structure and the corporate reserve structure, that requires large deficits. Otherwise, it just simply can't function at all. And it works a little bit like this. The government deficits equal the savings, the euro savings of the rest of the economy to the penny. And so if you've got a 15 trillion euro deficit across the Eurozone, that means the rest of the world somewhere, either in your own countries or maybe some foreign countries, but somebody has a savings of exactly 15 trillion euro. And that the form of that savings is your bonds and cash in circulation, but it's mostly your bonds. Okay? The bonds issued by a government when a deficit spend become the savings for pension funds, for example. Now, if you go to a country like Italy, I'm trying to remember the number, but it might be something like 20% of all wages go into an employee's pension fund, or they're somehow set aside for retirement. Where is that supposed to come from? In a capitalist economy, if all the income has to be spent for all the output to get sold, if people don't spend their income, all the things they produce don't get sold. Everybody's income is exactly enough to buy their output. If you look at the GDP, that's a measurement of both what everybody paid when they bought everything for, and the amount of euro that everybody got when they sold everything. You buy something for €1, somebody else sells something for €1. So you can measure your output by how much everybody spent or by how much everybody sold. It's the exact same number. And if you measure it by how much everybody sold, the amount that got paid, that's also everybody's income. And all that income has to be spent, or else the GDP doesn't get sold. It's a very simple identity. The input and the output are all the same number. Now, what happens is if people don't spend all their income because they put a large chunk of it in a pension fund, somebody else has to spend more than their income to make up for that, or the output doesn't get sold, people are out of work, and the economy goes down, which is exactly what's been happening. There hasn't been enough spending to make up for all the savings, all the euro going into pension funds, corporate reserves, foreign reserves, euro reserves by foreign nations, foreign companies. Somebody has to spend more than their income to make up for it. Now, the population will sometimes spend more than its income. It'll borrow to buy a house, it'll borrow to buy a car, it'll use credit cards. But more often than not, that's not nearly enough, because our savings plans are much larger than that. And that requires the governments to spend more than their income. largest savings plans and the largest need to counteract all those savings, all those people not spending their income. So large deficits in Italy are there because Italians save a lot and put a lot of money in their pension funds.
So there is a fact to breaking down the deficit. So for what reason this fact is impossible?
Okay, so the reason Italy must run a large deficit is because there's so many euro going into savings in Italy, in their pension fund contributions, corporate reserves, and that type of thing. And so the only way you can successfully bring down the deficit is to reduce everybody's savings, is to take away people's savings. And when you take away the savings, the economy doesn't function. And they don't recognize that. The authorities in Europe don't recognize that the deficits are there to provide the savings required for all the pension funds of Europe. They don't recognize that. If they recognize that, they would be more than willing to allow for large deficits to supply the savings. But they're not, and so they fight it. And so today the European Central Bank said, yes, we will help with the interest rates and the funding, but it's conditional on bringing down your deficit. Well, it's impossible. Okay, all that's going to do is make the economy worse. You take away more money through taxes and you cut spending, and now there's not enough money to buy the output, there's not enough money for the savings, and unemployment goes up, and the economy just gets worse and worse. And that's what they're doing. And it's all because they do not understand that the savings comes from deficit spending and nowhere else. It's just a matter of accounting. It's an accounting identity. It's an obvious accounting fact. The people in the government who are inside the central bank and inside the treasury, the ones I've talked to, they understand this. They're not but the policy people, the ones running it, making the decisions, they do not understand it. And until they do, it's going to be very, very difficult to be living in Europe.
So, in the euro area, there is no leader for the savings. What do you think about?
Yeah, so if Italy went back to the lira and had its own currency, then it would be able to conduct the necessary deficit spending to provide for the savings and a good economy. And you could be at full employment and you could be very prosperous. However, let's look at England, the UK. They could do that also right now. There's no reason in the UK, there's no monetary reason, there's no market reason that they could not run larger deficits, accommodate their savings, and have a very prosperous economy. But they don't. The United States has its own currency. It could be at full employment and prosperity, but it's not. And nor is Japan. Because all of these countries, even though operationally they are independent, they are sovereign, they are capable of running any deficit they want, they still believe that deficits are bad, and they do not connect the deficits to their savings. And so, yes, if you have your own currency, you can get it right and you have the potential, but it still requires leadership that understands this. And the problem is, I can't see any leadership in Italy that understands this. All right? And if the leadership understood it, and the rest of Europe, if their leadership understood it, then the euro would be operating just fine, and everybody would be able to run their deficits to whatever they need, and everyone would have prosperity. But none of the leadership understands it at any level, and even the opposition parties don't seem to understand it. And so somehow, this understanding has to be promoted before there's going to be any real improvement. You agree?
So in Italy we have a problem, and I ask to you, is this an economic problem?
The situation in Italy is bad, very bad, and getting worse by the minute. Businesses failing, people losing their livelihood, unemployment going up. It's human, and it's completely man-made. It's not an economic problem. There's no shortage of food, there's no shortage of clothing, there's no shortage of housing. to operate the financial system. And everybody living there is paying the price. It's a bad price, and it's a long. The destruction is long-term destruction, and I just feel awful about it.
So I ask to you, what do you think about of the information that we have in the world about the monetary system?
It certainly has expanded communications, but unfortunately it hasn't helped people sort out what's right, what's wrong. And there's just a lot of bad information about the monetary system, about economics going around, and the bad information seems to get everywhere. For example, most people in Europe believe that their governments should balance the budget, and that's assumed, and that's the basis for all of their conversations and all of their collective intelligence. It contains that one assumption that you're supposed to balance the budget, and it's just plain wrong. And once the collective intelligence is wrong, it's very difficult to stop it from destroying itself, which is what we're seeing in Europe. We're seeing the self-destruction of the European society. And when you look at the polls, everyone wants to stay in the euro. It's not, and that's because it's not obvious that the euro is the problem. Okay. In fact, it's what is obvious to most people is the wrong thing, and that is that the euro is just fine. They've been in many financial crises before. The people in Greece, the people in Italy. In Greece, they had the military take over. They had very high inflation. And they saw the currency go down, and they saw high unemployment, and every problem you could think of. And during those crises, the currency always went down. They always had inflation. This time, they have a crisis, a bad crisis, but the currency didn't go down, and they're not getting inflation. So the immediate reaction is, oh, good thing we didn't have our own money. Good thing that we were on the euro. At least the money's okay. Okay, so what seems obvious to everyone is that the money was the only good thing that's come through the crisis and relatively intact without a problem. So why would anybody want to get rid of the money?
Absolutely.
Instead, they blame the political leadership. They blame, they blame fiscal responsibility. They blame all kinds of things. But the fact is, the euro is the problem, and the management of the euro is the problem, and the attempt to balance budgets is the problem. And so, so to your question, the collective intelligence gets misguided. It gets started on the wrong assumptions. And you see vast movements now to go back on the gold standard and send all the immigrants home and eliminate free trade and all these things that the collective intelligence has just gotten wrong through the internet. So it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed blessing. Does that answer your question?
And I want to ask you, Warren, this question. Explain to me, explain to us, if it is important or not the owner of the money in the act of the emission. And then explain to me, explain to us, what do you think about the ABS, the SPV, and the covered bond?
Let me answer the second question first. In an economy like the European Union, those financial instruments are important in determining the term structure of interest rate. So what they do is they work to modify the term structure of interest rates to the extent that interest rates are important. They are important, and now personally, I would leave the risk-free rate at zero, and have the European Central Bank guarantee the debt of all the member nations, so that the interest rate on all the bonds and debt they issue is zero. In which case, these other instruments to control interest rates would not be necessary, because the term structure of rates would just sit at zero. Like Japan's done for the last 20 years. Okay, now to your first question, and that is the role of the issuer of the currency, the role of government expenditures in a monetary economy. It has to be first understood that in the first instance, the purpose served by the monetary anybody, would not be able to employ anyone with its currency. So in the first instance, taxation functions to create unemployment. That is the purpose of taxation, is to create people looking for paid work. So the government first levies a tax, okay, and payable in its own currency. It has now created an economy that needs the government's money to pay the tax. It's created unemployment. It's created people in the economy who need the government's money to survive. And so the next step is for government to spend its otherwise worthless currency, but for government to now can spend its currency to hire the people that it needs to provision itself in the military, the legal system, the education, public health. Right? So what we have is taxation has created a number of unemployed people. Presumably, the reason the government created the unemployed people was to hire them. So the taxation creates a certain number of unemployed, and presumably the government would hire that many unemployed people that provision the government to be government employees to run the government. However, what happens chronically and repeatedly, because this is not well understood, the civil process is not understood, is the government's tax creates more unemployed people than it wants to hire. Millions of more unemployed people than it wants to hire. So first, government implements taxation, which creates tens of millions of unemployed, and then it only hires a few million of those. It leaves the rest of those people as unemployed in the private sector. It leaves the economy at well below capacity, struggling to get the money to pay the tax that can only come from government. Right? So the answer to unemployment is quite simple. You either hire the people that you tax unemployed, or you reduce the tax so you don't create so many unemployed and just hire the ones you want. And that's a political decision as to whether Europe's unemployment rate will be cut down by putting taxes or increasing public spending. Either one will work. And it's the outcomes are very different, and those are the political choices. Now let me just add one thing. Taxation creates the need to get currency and tax, but it also creates a need to save, because taxation introduces a high level of insecurity. Suddenly, there are taxes due every year, every day, forever. It creates a continuous need for that currency, for that money in the economy. And so people like to have extra. They like to have cash in their pockets. They don't run with no money. They like to put money in their pension funds. They like to save for the future. Foreign governments like to save your currency for various reasons. So corporations like to have massive reserves. Well, again, the money to pay taxes and the money to net save in the economy can only come from the government. And so the government taxation creates a need both to pay tax and to save. And so what can be stated as a point of logic is that if the government does not spend enough to cover its tax liabilities plus any savings desires that it's also creating, the evidence is unemployment. That is, unemployment is the evidence that the government has not spent enough to